The dust clung to everything, a fine, gritty veil over the despair that hung heavy in the air. It coated the sagging tents, the scrawny livestock, the faces of the hopeful and the hopeless gathered in the makeshift square. It settled on the auction block, a rough-hewn platform where dreams, or what little remained of them, were bartered away. This was Redemption Gulch, a name spat more often than spoken, where human life held less value than a sturdy mule. On this day, the goods for sale were varied and bleak: tools, worn saddles, and finally people. Shivering, hollow-eyed figures, their spirits long since broken, paraded before the indifferent gaze of potential buyers. Among them stood a girl, small even for her years, her frame fragile beneath thin, soiled clothes. Her head was bowed, dark hair partially concealing a face etched with a fear that went beyond the immediate horror of her circumstances. Her left leg bent at an unnatural angle, rendering her limp profound, a visible mark of her uselessness in this harsh world. Whispers rippled through the crowd, cruel and dismissive. Worthless, cripple, a burden. The auctioneer, a man whose voice boomed with practiced apathy, saw only damaged goods. "Next lot," he bellowed, gesturing towards the girl. Female, Chinese, approximately 16, 17. Some kind of injury. He waved a dismissive hand. "Can't work the mines, can't work the fields. Not much good for anything." Likely laughter, sharp and cruel, pricked the air. "What am I bid for the unfortunate?" Silence. The crowd shifted, already losing interest. A damaged girl meant expenditure, not profit. A liability. Despair, cold and absolute, washed over the girl. This was it then. Abandonment. Starvation. A slow, lonely end in the dust. 50 cents, someone sneered from the back. Laughter erupted again, louder this time. Pittance. Less than the price of a single bullet. The auctioneer sighed, ready to declare the lot unsold, to simply discard her. But then, a voice, low and rough, cut through the jeers. 50 cents. All eyes turned towards the edge of the crowd. Standing apart was a man, tall and lean, his face obscured by the wide brim of a worn hat. A stranger, a cowboy, by the look of him, though his clothes were patched and his horse stood tethered a short distance away, saddlebags light. He had an air of quiet solitude, of someone who belonged nowhere and everywhere. He was not like the others, not part of the pack. A wave of confusion, then anger, rippled through the townsfolk. Who was this man? Why would he buy this burden? The auctioneer blinked, surprised but pragmatic. 50 cents, I'm bid. Going once, going twice. He hammered the gavel down with finality. Sold. To the gentleman in the hat. The cowboy stepped forward, his movements deliberate. The girl, still trembling, didn't dare look up. She could feel the weight of hostile stares, directed not just at her anymore, but at the man who had claimed her for the price of a cheap drink. As the cowboy approached, a deputy, stout and red-faced, blocked his path. "Hold on there, mister. What in God's name do you think you're doing? That thing's no good to nobody." The cowboy stopped, his gaze steady, unwavering. He didn't speak, but the silence was potent, filled with a refusal to explain, a quiet defiance. Other men from the crowd started to gather, their faces hard, suspicious. "Ain't right," one muttered. "Throwing good money away," another added. "Maybe he's got other plans for her." The insinuation hung heavy while the girl flinched, a silent gasp escaping her lips. The cowboy ignored them all. He simply reached out, not to touch her, but to take the rope binding her wrists, cutting it with a small, sharp knife. His movements were precise, economical. He then extended a hand, palm up, not demanding but offering. The girl hesitated, her mind a whirlwind of terror and disbelief. He wasn't like the others. He hadn't laughed. He hadn't sneered. She looked at the outstretched hand, calloused and weathered, a stark contrast to the rough hands that had bound her. Slowly, tentatively, she placed her small, cold hand in his. His grip was firm but gentle. He didn't pull her, but waited, allowing her to find her footing. Every eye in the square was fixed on them. The air crackled with unspoken threats. As they moved away from the platform, the girl leaning heavily on her injured leg, supported by the cowboy's silent strength, the murmurs grew louder, more venomous. "He ain't gonna last the night. They'll be comin' for him." The girl didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone, the malice that clung to them like the pervasive dust. She stumbled along beside the cowboy, acutely aware of the eyes on her back, feeling like prey marked for the wolves. Fear was a tangible thing, a cold knot in her stomach, a trembling in her limbs. She didn't know who this man was or why he had done this, but she knew one thing with chilling certainty. They were not safe. The night promised no peace. They left the main square, the cowboy leading her towards the edge of the settlement, away from the few permanent structures and towards a small, solitary shack nestled against the rocky hillside. It was little more than scavenged wood and corrugated tin, crude and exposed, but it offered a semblance of shelter from the biting wind that had begun to whip through the gulch. Inside it was dark and Spartan. A dirt floor, a rough cot in one corner, a small, cold stove. The air smelled of stale tobacco and dust. The cowboy released her hand once they were inside, closing the door quietly but firmly behind them, shutting out the hostile world, at least for now. The girl stood awkwardly just inside the entrance, unsure where to look, where to move. Her leg ached with a dull, persistent throb. Her body trembled uncontrollably, a delayed reaction to the day's events. She hugged herself, trying to ward off both the physical cold and the icy grip of fear that still held her tight. The cowboy moved without speaking. He went to the stove, rummaged in a small box, and pulled out kindling and a few pieces of wood. Soon, a small fire crackled to life, casting dancing shadows on the walls. The warmth spread slowly, pushing back the chill. He didn't look at her directly, giving her space, an unspoken understanding of her need to feel unseen, unthreatened. He moved with an economy of motion, his presence quiet but solid. He fetched a dented metal cup and filled it with water from a bucket near the door, offering it to her. His hand was steady, his gaze finally meeting hers for a brief moment. His eyes, in the flickering firelight, were a deep, calm blue, holding no judgment, no cruelty, only a weary watchfulness. She took the cup with trembling hands, her fingers brushing his. His skin was rough, warm. She drank the water slowly, the cool liquid a soothing balm to her parched throat. It was the first act of simple kindness she had received in what felt like a lifetime. He then moved to a small, roughly made table, pulling out some dried meat and hard biscuits from a canvas bag. He placed them on the table, gesturing silently towards them. Food. Real food. Her stomach, empty and cramped, growled in protest. She hadn't eaten properly in days, perhaps weeks. Hesitantly, she hobbled towards the table, her injured leg dragging. The pain was a constant companion, a reminder of her brokenness. She picked up a piece of meat, her fingers clumsy. It was tough, dry, but tasted like a feast. She ate slowly, deliberately, trying to make it last, acutely aware of his presence, his silence. He sat on the cot, watching her with that same quiet intensity. She didn't feel like a spectacle under his gaze, but rather observed, assessed perhaps but not judged. He didn't ask her name. He didn't ask about her leg. He simply let her be, letting the silence fill the space between them. A silence that was not empty, but watchful, expectant. As the fire grew warmer, the initial terror began to recede, replaced by a gnawing uncertainty. Why had he bought her? 50 cents. It was nothing, and yet it had bought her from the precipice of oblivion. What did he want? The fear, though dulled, was still there, a phantom ache beneath the fragile relief of warmth and food. She finished eating, her gaze flicking towards him. He hadn't touched the food. He was simply sitting there, his hands resting on his knees, a study in stillness. He seemed waiting. Waiting for what? The townsfolk. The threat was still outside. She could feel it, a pressure in the air, a low hum of malice beyond the thin walls. They hadn't just bought her. They had bought conflict, bought the disapproval and potentially the violence of a community that saw her as less than human and him as a fool, maybe worse. As the night deepened, the sounds of the gulch faded, replaced by the crackling fire and the rhythmic thud of her own heart. Sleep seemed impossible. She looked at her leg, the way it twisted wrong. Shame washed over her. She was a burden. He would realize it soon enough. And then what? She curled into herself, trying to minimize her presence. The cowboy remained on the cot, a silent sentinel. She closed her eyes, but saw only the harsh faces of the crowd, heard the cruel laughter. She felt the trembling start again. A soft sound stirred her. The cowboy had moved. He was standing now, looking towards the door, his body tense. She held her breath. The silence outside felt charged. He was listening, waiting. The threat was real. Hours crawled by, each tick of the unseen clock stretching into an eternity. The girl had eventually drifted into a fitful sleep on the floor near the stove, the warmth a small comfort against the biting chill of the night and her own fear. When she woke, the fire had died down to embers, and the first hint of gray light filtered through the cracks in the walls. The cowboy was still awake, sitting by the door, a rifle resting across his lap. He hadn't slept. He had kept watch. Her heart hammered in her chest. The pressure outside the shack felt heavier now, more palpable than in the dark of night. She could hear movement, low voices. They were here. They had come for him. And for her. A wave of pure, raw terror surged through her. She was trapped. Her leg ached, making any thought of escape laughable. She was useless, a liability just as they had said. The thought was like a physical blow. She had brought this upon him, this stranger who had shown her a scrap of kindness. Shame burned hotter than the dying embers. The cowboy didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the door, his body language radiating a quiet readiness. He was prepared. For them. For the cruelty that waited outside. As the light grew stronger, the voices outside became clearer, louder. Men's voices, hard and demanding. "Open up, mister. We just want to talk. You got something in there that don't belong to you." Their words were laced with menace, thinly veiled threats. The girl scrambled backwards, pressing herself against the rough wall, trying to disappear. Her breathing was shallow, ragged. She watched the cowboy, her eyes wide with a mixture of fear and a dawning, unwilling admiration. He didn't respond. He simply waited, rifle held steady. The silence from within the shack was a provocation. A harsh bang against the door made her jump. "You gonna be reasonable, or we gotta come in and make you?" Someone yelled. A moment of silence. Then another, louder bang. They were testing the door. They were impatient. Helplessness threatened to swallow her whole. She wanted to run, to hide, but there was nowhere to go. She wanted to scream, but her throat was tight with fear. And then, something shifted within her. Watching the cowboy, alone and outnumbered, prepared to face down a mob for what? For 50 cents? For a girl deemed worthless? His quiet courage, his refusal to yield, sparked something deep inside her, something long dormant. Resilience. She had survived the voyage, survived the camps, survived the auction block. She had endured pain, hunger, despair. She was broken, yes, her body marked, but her spirit hadn't surrendered yet. She looked around the meager shack, her eyes scanning the few objects within. A small kettle near the stove, the water bucket, the cowboy's worn saddlebags. She remembered something her grandmother had taught her long ago in a different life, a different world. A simple lesson, dismissed by the men as old wives' tales, but her grandmother had sworn by its efficacy. It was a small thing, seemingly insignificant, but perhaps it could be something. Anything was better than waiting like a trapped animal. Her eyes settled on a small pouch tied to the cowboy's saddlebag. Inside, she had seen him place a few dried herbs and leaves the previous evening, perhaps for making tea or flavoring food. Her mind raced, connecting the forgotten lesson to the contents of the pouch. Could it work? Was it too risky? The pounding on the door intensified. Wood groaned under the assault. They wouldn't wait much longer. She had to do something. For him. He hadn't abandoned her to the mob yesterday, even when offered an easy escape by just walking away. He had chosen this. He had chosen her. The realization solidified. A strange, powerful warmth spreading through her chest, pushing back the cold of fear. He was protecting her. She would protect him. It was a silent vow, fierce and absolute. She moved, ignoring the protest from her injured leg. She hobbled towards the saddlebag, fumbling with the ties. Her fingers, clumsy and stiff, finally loosened the pouch. She looked inside, recognizing some of the dried plants, others unfamiliar. She selected a few, her hands trembling slightly. She needed the kettle, the water, and the dying embers. She needed to work fast. The voices outside were a clamor now, insults and threats escalating. The door wouldn't hold much longer. The cowboy remained at his post, his face grim, ready. He saw her movement, a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but didn't question her, didn't stop her. Trust, an unspoken, fragile trust had formed between them in the long, silent night. He faced the front, the external threat. She would face it in her own way, using the only tools she possessed: observation, memory, and a desperate, newfound will to survive, together. The door splintered inwards with a crash. 4 men surged into the small shack, their faces contorted with anger and prejudice. The air filled with the stench of stale whiskey and malice. The cowboy raised his rifle, but didn't fire, holding it steady, a silent warning. The girl, huddled near the dying embers of the stove, ignored the intrusion. She was focused on her task. She had found a small, chipped pot, poured water from the bucket into it, added the dried herbs and leaves she had selected, and placed it carefully among the glowing coals. A thin stream of steam began to rise. "All right, mister, hand her over," the lead man snarled, taking a step forward. He was big, burly, his eyes fixed on the girl with cruel intent. The cowboy spoke for the first time since the auction, his voice low, steady, devoid of emotion. "She stays." It wasn't a negotiation. It was a statement of fact, a line drawn in the dust. "You think you can just waltz in here and defy us? Defy Redemption Gulch?" Another man sneered, gesturing with a heavy hand. "That thing ain't got no rights. She's property. Damaged property at that." Laughter, harsh and grating, filled the confined space. They advanced, slowly, confidently. They saw a lone man, a crippled girl, and assumed an easy victory. They didn't see the quiet determination in the cowboy's eyes, or the fierce concentration on the girl's face. The water in the pot began to bubble, the steam becoming thicker, carrying a faint, pungent aroma. The girl reached for a rough cloth she had found and, with painful effort, managed to grip the hot pot. She had to do it now, before they reached the cowboy, before violence erupted. Ignoring the searing heat through the cloth and the pain in her leg, she shuffled towards the center of the shack, towards the advancing men. "Get back, you little cripple!" the lead man yelled, raising a hand to push her aside. But as he drew closer, the steam from the pot, now directly between them and the cowboy, enveloped him. He inhaled sharply, expecting just hot vapor, but the scent of the herbs was potent, unexpected. He coughed, stumbling back, his eyes watering. "What they?" Another man followed, also hit by the fragrant steam. He swore, his face contorted. "Smells like something rotten," he gagged. It wasn't just a smell. Her grandmother had said certain combinations, when heated, released vapors that disoriented, caused nausea, sometimes worse, depending on the herbs and the person. A simple trick used to ward off pests or sometimes unwelcome intruders. She kept moving the pot, a barrier of pungent steam between the cowboy and his attackers. The men hesitated, coughing, shielding their faces. The surprise weapon, wielded by the worthless girl, had stopped their charge. The cowboy, seeing her actions, understood instantly. His stance shifted subtly, his focus broadening to include the threat she was deflecting. He hadn't needed to fire. Not yet. "Get her!" one of the men yelled, pushing past the steaming barrier, lunging towards the girl. But his momentary hesitation had given the cowboy the opening he needed. Faster than they anticipated, the cowboy moved, not raising the rifle to shoot, but using it like a staff, a lever. He swung the butt hard against the lead attacker's ribs. The man cried out, clutching his side, doubling over. The second man, still coughing, fumbled for a knife, but the cowboy was on him, disarming him with brutal efficiency. A swift kick sending the weapon skittering across the floor. The remaining two men, unnerved by the girl's strange defense and the cowboy's sudden, decisive violence, faltered. They hadn't expected a fight, not a real one, and certainly not one involving the girl. The shack was small, the air thick with steam and tension. It was no place for a protracted brawl. With a final, fearful glance at the unmoving cowboy and the girl standing defiantly with her smoking pot, they backed away towards the splintered door. "This ain't over," one spat, retreating. "You can't stay here. We'll be back." The threats hung in the air, but lacked conviction. They stumbled back outside, leaving the shack in a sudden, fragile quiet. The girl lowered the pot, her arms aching, her leg throbbing. She was shaking, but it was different now. Not just fear, but adrenaline and something else, triumph. Small, unexpected, but real. She looked at the cowboy. He lowered the rifle slowly, his gaze intense as he looked at her. A flicker of something unreadable passed between them. Respect? Understanding? She had done more than just survive. She had contributed. She had fought back in the only way she could. The sun was fully risen now, casting long shadows. The immediate threat had receded, chased away by a cowboy's quiet strength and a disabled girl's surprising resourcefulness. The silence in the shack was different from the watchful silence of the night. Felt earned. They looked at each other, two outcasts in a world that had tried to break them. They were still in Redemption Gulch, still surrounded by hostility, but in that moment, standing amidst the wreckage of the door, something new had been forged between them. Not ownership, but partnership. Not despair, but a shared, resilient spark. The journey was far from over, the challenges immense, but they would face them not as buyer and bought, but as two souls who had found unexpected refuge and strength in each other. Dignity wasn't granted. It was claimed, piece by painful piece, in the face of a world determined to deny it. And sometimes, the most profound strength was found not in the absence of brokenness, but in the fierce, unyielding refusal to let it define you.